All right, today we're going to try something new with the Unbounded Capital YouTube channel and do a Ryan Charles inspired direct to camera riff on something I've been thinking about. The topic, I guess, will be about onboarding and finding target demographics that both will be very receptive to what we're talking about and also understand it in a way that makes us more efficient with our time as we're doing outreach. So for prioritizing which groups to target, I think this group should be high on the list. And that group is the MAGA sphere, which is kind of a Twitter specific version of just saying, Trump supporters. But it is a little bit more specific in that I think people who would claim to be of the MAGA sphere are kind of a certain variety of Trump supporter that I think would be particularly good for us to target. And this is a topic I've been interested in for a while. Preceding my interest in Bitcoin, there was a lot of political thinking and writing, but it's not unrelated. And this will maybe get to how it's somewhat related. But I was going to write a piece months ago on this topic, and I decided not to for whatever reason. But today I was on Twitter, and something kind of sparked my memory of that and got my cogs turning a little bit. And that was an exchange between two guys that I would loosely say are in the MAGA sphere. I don't know if they would say that, but John Robb and Jack Murphy. So those are two interesting thinkers, writers, guys that have pretty big networks on Twitter specifically also. But basically, John Robb had a tweet that said it was about the future of big data. And the tweet was essentially, there's three potential futures. The first is extreme privacy future. The second is a future where, like today, giant companies or even sovereign states own our data. And the third is one where users own their data and have data privacy in that extent. Okay, great tweet. And he had a thread below that kind of continued on that line of thinking. I saw it because Jack retweeted it with, added some stuff to it. And he said, yeah, what we need is the ability to own our data and the ability to have micropayments to pay for information. Something along the lines of that, at least. And to my knowledge, neither of these guys know about Bitcoin SV. Neither of them wrote those words in their tweets. And that's interesting, right? Because what they were saying is basically, that could be a presentation at a CoinGeek conference. It's totally par for the course on what Bitcoin SV is aiming to do and is enabling already. So that's interesting, but I think it's kind of indicative of a broader pattern, which is why I think the MAGA Trump supporter world would be a great demographic for BSV to target. And the reason is, well, it's a little bit complicated, but let's parse through it here. The reason is both of these, or let's focus first on Bitcoin. To explain the history of Bitcoin to date, to arrive at Bitcoin SV, you have to go through this crazy story about, it was this one thing and it kind of got subverted and there was a lot of misinformation and now there's all these different versions. And that's it's a very complicated story. Anyone who's tried to explain this to people knows that's a very complicated story to relay. Not only is it complicated, but if you want to do it justice, you have to explain really esoteric things like you have to explain forking. So you have to kind of explain the ethos underpinning the open source community. You have to explain, as part of the forking conversation, you have to explain mining. All these things just slow down the process of explaining Bitcoin and getting to the real value proposition of the Bitcoin-enabled internet. I think with the MAGA community, you largely won't have to do this. So they will be receptive to the explanation, in short, of a kind of niche ideological persuasion that subverted the information hierarchy, kind of confused the entire community and made it such that no one's really thinking clearly about the space. I mean, that is more or less, what most people in Bitcoin SV subscribe to, but that sounds like a crazy Mission Impossible storyline, right? It won't to the Trump supporters, who that's their view of the political landscape currently. So that'll register right away. It's made even better by the fact that most of the misinformation is pinpointed on a specific individual. So for MAGA, that's Trump, and for Bitcoin, it's Craig Wright. So they're interesting because both of them are dealing in rather complex domains. So the information hierarchy that exists in politics, say the New York Times or Harvard Law, these institutions are kind of at the helm of the misinformation campaign. In cryptocurrency, we don't necessarily have the ear of the New York Times yet, but we have our own prestige organizations. We have Blockstream, we have cryptocurrency media outlets, and they're kind of at the helm of this misinformation campaign. And both of these groups that are misinforming the broader community have this assumption that most people will just trust them because of the complexity of the domain. So for Trump, you might think, well, I can't really disagree with the New York Times. I'm not an expert on political science or foreign policy or law, right? And so they'll kind of lean on that to suggest that you can't really scrutinize this guy unless you are able to disagree with the New York Times on those things. Similarly, in Bitcoin, I'd say it's even more complex, right? You have cryptography, you have computer science, you have economics, Austrian economics. These are pretty esoteric and complex areas that most people, when they're just looking to understand, hey, what's Bitcoin, they have no opinion on this stuff, and they kind of have to cede to the people. First to the people that are at the top of the information hierarchy, but also just the common wisdom within the community. But I think if you choose a few really strong videos or articles on, let's say, Bitcoin, you can kind of start to crack at this. So like one great thing that I'm thinking of right now is Peter Rizun, I'm not sure how to say his name, from Bitcoin Unlimited. When he went on Peter McCormack's podcast to talk about Lightning Network, he did a great job of just breaking down why Lightning Network is not a viability or a viable possibility for the future. So for instance, you give that to someone that's looking into cryptocurrency and you just say, hey, well, watch this, tell me what you think about Lightning Network. They might be a little bit suspicious. I think you're going to have a much easier time with that pitch to a Trump supporter because they're on board with this whole idea, right? So they've seen this happen to Trump. And if you say, well, here's a few good videos, watch this Daniel Krawitz's video, watch this, watch that, they can kind of zoom through that crazy story. So if I'm right about this, and I think I am from my personal experience as well as just talking to friends that I would categorize as MAGA, you can just get them up to speed so quickly, and then you don't need to worry about that crazy story that you have to explain. They'll kind of do it quickly. They'll do it on their own, but they can do it in a very expedited fashion if you point them towards the right materials. And then where are you? Then you're at, okay, Bitcoin SV is Bitcoin. Bitcoin SV can scale to power the internet, and Bitcoin SV enables micropayments, data sovereignty, all this stuff, right? And now we're just at where John Robb and Jack Murphy were. And they're gonna be receptive to that message because they see the problem, and on their own, it seems they're already finding the solution. And if you say, hey, we have a network that does this and is doing this today, and will continue to scale to do this in the future, they're all ears. And it's not just John, Rob, and Jack Murphy. Ali Alexander is a pretty big member of the, Twitter MAGA sphere. He also works as a political consultant in Washington, D.C. He's already on Twitch, so he's a Bitcoiner. He gets this stuff on a pretty technical level even. Mike Cernovich, which is like a very influential node on the Twitter MAGA network, I would say. He's been saying and asking some interesting questions about Bitcoin and Bitcoin SV in the past few weeks. I think this is a really good network to tap into. I think it's very wide and very deep. It's wide enough to elect Trump president, right? And that's not all the Twitter MAGA sphere, but it was, an influential part of it. I think if we target these people, we'll have a great ROI on our time in terms of explaining and getting them up to speed. We're going to have a lot less of a struggle getting them through the hard to believe first portion. And once we do, they're going to take it and run with it from the point of view of what can the internet do once we have Bitcoin at scale. So those are my thoughts. I would love to hear what you have to say. I don't think this is really, it does depend on some political point of view to some degree, but I think you don't have to be a Trump supporter to see the benefit of targeting this demographic. I think it makes a lot of sense, and I think it would be a good use of our energy and our scarce time. So I would love to hear what you think, and maybe we'll do more of these videos in the future if you guys are receptive to this. All right, thank you.